Hey everybody, this is Philip J. Fry from Futurama, Pizza Delivery Boy. And right now you're listening to This Week in Geek. And you can find it on the web at thisweekingeek.net. It's awesome. It's cool.
And now it's time for another special feature.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to This Week in Geek, and I'm your host, Mike the Birdman Dodd. And I'm actually not alone, though not in the same room, as you can guess, as we enjoy yet another week in paradise, or as I call it, quarantini. That's right, guys. We are doing yet another series of interviews here on This Week in Geek. And as you may have heard in the last couple of months, we've been actually doing quite a few interviews here on the show. And one of my favorite ones that we did late last year is we talked to In Search of Darkness director David Weiner, and we talked about that documentary, which talked about the love and culture and phenomena that really is the 1980s horror movie. And I found out by talking with David after the interview, they were actually working on something else, and that was going to be In Search of Tomorrow, which is a documentary which focuses on 1980s sci-fi movies. So we're talking RoboCop, Return of the Jedi, Blade Runner, even things like E.T., and here's some deep cuts like Cherry 2000 and Trancers. So definitely up my alley. And this is something that I've been excited for quite some time. And I just recently found out that their Kickstarter has started. And as of this recording, the Kickstarter is now live. It went live on April 21st. So this is a project that's going to take a little while to complete, but if In Search of Darkness is any judge of character to go by, I don't think we have a whole lot to really worry about. But I did want to talk with David as he begins to launch this project and kind of get an idea of what's going to be covered in Search of Tomorrow. So without any further ado, we welcome back to Twig, David Weiner, director of In Search of Tomorrow.
Happy to be here, and I appreciate you having me back and excited to talk to you.
Absolutely. I mean, looking at the caliber of work we saw from In Search of Darkness on how comprehensively it covered the 1980s horror genre, I'm really holding high expectations for In Search of Tomorrow, because horror, it's a genre where it has its fans, but it is niche. Sci-fi, I find, is a little bit broader family appeal, which is where I discovered sci-fi through like Star Wars, and to a lesser extent, things like Trancers. I found that on a very weird trip to the VHS store. But just seeing that someone's willing to do the proper deep dive into these movies is something exciting, and I'm really glad your production company is going to be doing over the course of the next little bit. So I guess let's talk about the genesis for In Search of Darkness, or not In Search of Darkness, In Search of Tomorrow, because the previous two documentaries, The Last Action Heroes and In Search of Darkness, have focused on different genres, and obviously I guess the next big pick was sci-fi, but what drew you? Because you're the producer and the writer and the director for this one, right?
Yeah. Well, this all stems from executive producer Robin Block. He has a company called Creator VC, and he put together In Search of the Last Action Heroes, and as he was in production with that, that's when In Search of Darkness came about, and I came on board. I helped a little bit with In Search of the Last Action Heroes, but I did not. Oliver Harper directed that. And so when we were going to say, what are we doing next? And he brought up In Search of Tomorrow, I got super excited. And he handed it to me on a silver platter, and I felt honored because, boy, it's very much in my wheelhouse. I love multiple genres. When I was the executive editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, I enjoyed being able to jump across a variety of genres: sci-fi, fantasy, horror, superhero genres. And what's cool about the sci-fi genre, especially the 80s, is there's lots of straddle between genres within these films. And so it's not just outer space adventures. You've got the post-apocalyptic genre, you've got the mad scientist genre. If it has to do with technology, Cold War films, whether it's Firefox or War Games or Blue Thunder or Megaforce, it all fits in there. And I get to tackle all of these films, no matter what the perceived quality is, whether they were critical or commercial hits or whether they're fan favorites, I get to take a deep dive. And so the logical progression of the structure of In Search of Darkness, where you take an entire decade and you dive into it year by year with in between chapters of larger context topics, whether it's visual effects or creature effects, or the heroes, the villains, the robots, the socio-political factors that played into the type of programming and filmmaking that was being made. I get to approach it in the same way with a similar structure and template. And the cherry on top is getting upwards of 50, 60 icons of the era to talk about not only their projects, but their favorite films of the genre too.
So one of the things that I remember that was covered at the end of In Search of Darkness, and it really made me wonder, simply because me and my producer and co-host Alex do a lot of interviews and work with companies such as Vinegar Syndrome and VVS Films, is you talked about digital preservation, and I can imagine finding some of these movies to get high quality footage from must prove to be difficult at best.
Yes. I can't expand on that other than to agree. Yeah, some of these it's difficult because what you're talking about, and just to clarify it in a simple sense, what happens is as every format expands to higher and higher quality, but it's like, listen, we're not doing things on 8-track tapes anymore. So the wealth of material that your dad plugged into his 8-track tape player in his Pinto. Some of that material never made it to to CD or MP3s. So I'm talking music now, but the same thing is with film. And so a lot of these films that started out on VHS and Laserdisc never made it to DVD, and then never made it to Blu-ray if that was the next jump. And now we're on 4K, 8K, 28K holograms. Either way, you lose a lot of material that people don't want to spend the money polishing up for high def, or sometimes you don't even know who owns the rights for these things. So it's definitely a problem in terms of preservation of cinematic history.
There was a conversation I had with someone recently, and I wish I could remember who off the top of my head, but they were telling me just how complicated it can be with who holds the rights to what, because if somebody passes away, this IP gets tossed around. And it is unfortunate that some of these movies that we grew up maybe seeing on big box VHS, or maybe they might be made direct for TV movies, potentially lost to time. Like one movie I recall, which I don't know whether you talk about it in your documentary or not, was, I think it was called The Day After, and that and that was the nuclear movie that scared the crap out of people in the 1980s. And I didn't think that would ever get ported to DVD, and yet it was. I saw it when I was probably in my mid-20s in the early 2000s. But I guess to return to the main topic at hand.
Well, I want to throw in real quick, like the day after, we have Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II and wrote Star Trek IV and directed 6 as well, and he did Time After Time in 1979. In '83, he was the director of The Day After. And Nicholas Meyer is absolutely, I'm so excited to have him on board, but he's going to be talking about this kind of stuff. And so he's the ideal person to talk about, in addition to the Star Trek franchise, talking time travel with Time After Time, and talking about the Cold War and the nuclear winter ramifications of what we were all experiencing in the early 80s during the height of the Cold War.
Absolutely, because you start to look at what genres really kind of rose to popularity during the 1980s, and I can think of things that often deal with nuclear war as a reaction. You look at the cyberpunk genre, sort of the high-tech, low-life, and often nuclear war is often mentioned as a side effect of something like that, or the Mad Max, which the Road Warrior came out during this time as
right, and it fits very much in this film. I'll let you continue, but I want to say that it's multiple genres, and it's not, like I said, it's not outer space all the time. A lot of it is as a result of technology. If we live in a dystopian in the world, that very much plays into the sci-fi concept and definition.
So, what were some of the what were some of the movies and things that you discovered while you were making this? Were you a little bit surprised? Because as you mentioned, it's not always simple cut and dry as lasers, pew pew, and here is a robot, because I wouldn't think of something like the Stepford Wives, for example, as sci-fi. Were there any gems you discovered while putting this together?
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing process as we're still putting this together. But I have the greatest homework ever. I get to do a deep dive in a lot of the films that I knew about or didn't know about, but I'd never seen. Like there's one particular movie I always remember seeing the box art on the VHS at the store, and I said one day I will rent this, and that was DEF CON 4. But I just never got around to it. I just always felt like I kind of learned, I had a learning curve about sometimes the box art and the movie do not meet up, and there's disappointment involved. And so I finally got to see DEF CON 4 and see what that was like, just to see if it would even qualify for this film. And it's a lot of these movies have a lot to offer for a lot of different reasons, and whether or not they're the best made film or the most well received film, a lot of them have their place in terms of when people saw them and why people saw them and why they're special to them. And so, yeah, these movies all have sort of like a comfort blanket element to them. So, boy, I'd never seen Solar Babies. I avoided Solar Babies because everyone said it's terrible when it came out, and it bombed at the box office. But it was always a curiosity in the back of my mind, like how good or bad can this be? Especially if Mel Brooks executive produced it. And I finally got around to seeing it, and it's definitely like Rollerball meets Mad Max meets, Starlight Express, and waiting for them all to break out in song. And if they don't make a Broadway musical out of this, I'm gonna spearhead that effort. But I throw this out by the magic of social media, and I'll say, well, what do you guys think? Because I sometimes need some help, some perspective, some input as to why these movies mean something to people, or if they don't at all. And so many people would say, oh, that was on HBO all the time. I love that movie. It means so much to me. When I was bored and I'd turn on the TV, I would escape into the world of, yes, Solar Babies. So, excuse me, there's plenty of these movies that a lot of people don't know as well. I discovered a number of them. Gosh, I had seen a lot of them too, so it doesn't quite, it's harder for me to say. But like I had never really followed the Trancers series as closely as I did, and so I got to revisit that and say, oh yeah, I forgot that they did some of this stuff, and that they had some really some aspirations for some real imagination in the world that they build, even though they had a limited budget.
Absolutely. Because really weird thing about us is I used to work for Charles Band for a summer early on in my public relations career. So going through a press list, I was so thrilled that you got Tim Thomerson, who obviously plays Jack Death in the Trancer series, but you also got Charles Band, who I feel is one of those guys who needs to be heard more, especially when it comes to the movies, because he had, I think it was Empire Pictures, Full Moon Entertainment. So you had Trancers, you had Doll Man, which is an underappreciated little gem of a film. As Brick Bardo, I think was the character's name. But Crash and Burn and all these other things, like I think Robot Jocks was the 80s as well. So just a lot of really cool connective kind of tissue there, because seeing these people who start out as they know their movies are going direct to video, but in the 80s, that was a viable way to make money. So what was it like to talk with someone like Charlie and Tim just to get their perspective on the genre like 30, 40 years later?
Well, I haven't talked to the likes of Charlie and Tim just yet because they're lined up. There's a certain amount of folks that I've talked to already, and there's a certain amount I haven't. So we're still lining up a bunch. Like I talked recently, right before this all went down. My last interview was with Sean Young talking, Blade Runner and Dune and even Baby Secret of the Lost Legend.
Oh my God, I haven't heard anybody talk about that in like 30 years.
How can you not be sitting with Sean Young and not talk about Baby Secret of the Lost Legend? That's a wasted opportunity. And so there's a way to include these things. There's a way to include this stuff. But I also want to say real quickly, I used to work for Full Moon Entertainment as well. When I first got into in Los Angeles, my first job working for Charlie Band was Full Moon Entertainment, and I worked on a couple Full Moon features early in the 90s. And so I'm excited to talk to Charlie Band from the point of view of, he has this incredible genre collection of amazing, lovable films that are sci-fi and horror and fantasy. And so, boy, I can't wait to talk to him. Tim Thomerson as well was in Cherry 2000. We can't forget. And
it's kind of amazing just seeing who you have potentially lined up for this. I mean, according to some of the press releases I've read for you, you've got Billy Duke from Predator, which is awesome. You've got Alan Dean Foster. I remember reading his novelization. I think it's Splinter of the Mind's Eye for like Star Wars. You got Bob Gale from Back to the Future. Lance Guest from The Last Starfighter. Ernie Hudson. Winston Zedmore himself from the Ghostbusters.
That's right.
One of the bigger names, I think this one's just fairly recently, you got Will Wheaton of The Big Bang Theory and Star Trek The Next Generation. So there are so many impressive names. And I saw this on your Twitter, and this makes me so happy because he's one of my favorite all-time composers is Brad Fiedel from the Terminator series.
Right.
Because my God, what an amazing soundtrack he put together in like just a few days on like a little keyboard. And it's really kind of neat just to see all the cast and crew you've assembled for this.
Well, if I could just go ahead, I'll let you ask your question.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, it's just astounding to me the level of comprehensiveness. And you even got Paul Verhoeven, who made my favorite movie of all time, that being RoboCop, to come back and talk, and Nancy Allen, who played Anne Lewis in that movie too. So that's really exciting.
Yes, and Kurtwood Smith is in the film as well. It's like with In Search of Darkness. It's very important for me to get a broad spectrum of composers, of writers, of actors, of directors, of effects folks. I want to expand on that, and so to have like effects wise, just to have Oscar winner Douglas Trumbull, who he did Blade Runner, he did Close Encounters, Star Trek the motion picture, he was on 2001, but he also directed Brainstorm, and he's a technical genius with multiple patents, and has a real incredible insight on the evolution of special effects just in the 80s alone, visual effects. And so you've got him, you've got Phil Tippett, Dennis Muren. Gosh, I want to know what it was like just to be able to be doing stop motion animation on Tauntauns and walkers and doing the visual effects for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. That's a movie on its own right there. And so it's very cool. It's very cool. I even have Kerry O'Quinn of Starlog Magazine, the editor-in-chief of Starlog Magazine. And very excited to have him on board because a lot of this was pre-internet. And so the only access we had to finding out the behind-the-scenes stories were magazines like Starlog and Cinefex and Cinefantastique and even Omni sometimes. This is meant to be a real comprehensive look about not only the movies themselves, but the marketing, the commercial elements of it, the toys, that we consume, the Burger King tumblers and glasses and stickers that we got. All these things were really, they shaped our life and our world, you know? I mean, it's like you got to throw in Max Headroom here somewhere too. It all fits.
Just the fact that you mentioned toys makes me so excited. My God, I hope you found a really good toy expert.
Yeah, well, Jason Lindsay, the co-founder of Biff Bang Pow, is in our documentary, and he is notable other than being extremely knowledgeable about that era and about the toy making process. He remembers being incredibly disappointed because he loved Flash Gordon. By the way, we have Flash Gordon himself, Sam J. Jones, in this. But he was so disappointed when Flash Gordon ended, and he ran to the toy store to find Flash Gordon action figures, and there was nothing. And it always ate away at him that that was a franchise that just didn't get the action figures when so many others did, like the Black Hole and of course Star Wars and many others. And so he took it upon himself when he grew up to track down and obtain the license and make his own Flash Gordon action figures. And he became friends with Sam J. Jones in that process. And that's a story that I can't wait to share with people.
That's kind of incredible how people living their dreams can lead to so many things just from them being a kid, I guess. And just kind of hearing that it's really kind of heartwarming. The fact that he wanted the action figure so bad that he went out and did something like this. That's really kind of inspiring, actually. I guess the closest thing I can relate to is when I was a kid. Yeah, there were RoboCop toys, but there wasn't the ones that would come later, which would come from McFarlane's Movie Maniacs series, and I think NECA would later hold the license for RoboCop. But wow, that's astounding. Now, one question I do have, just because I know it's a very big 80s animation piece, will you be covering stuff like Japanese anime, like Akira came out in the 80s?
Akira, absolutely. Akira, Heavy Metal, even Transformers the movie. These things were important, and animation and anime is no less a part of the 80s sci-fi movie scene than any of these others, and they play a crucial component in the visualization of futuristic worlds and experiences. And so, yes, absolutely. Can't wait to put those in and talk about those as well.
Oh man, that's going to be a piece that I'm looking forward to. Just being who I am, animation playing a very large part of my childhood. The fact that you'll be talking about these movies in great detail, especially since I think Transformers just celebrated a fairly significant anniversary, because it did have a release in theaters. I think it was last year or the year before last.
Just a couple of years ago. I wanted to add also that part of the visualization of the future, whether it was tech or imagination or a way of living, a lot of those visions of those films in that decade inspired many people to, when they would grow up, also to turn these visions into reality. And when we talk about Heavy Metal the movie, I think to myself, how awesome would it be? And I'd love to go after him. Is have Elon Musk talking about launching a convertible into space, and how that clearly connects with Heavy Metal and the opening shot of Heavy Metal, where you have the astronaut in the convertible, orbiting the Earth. That those two are connected, and to have people who say Bill Nye talking about the science fiction versus science fact. It's very important to sort of connect the fantasy with the reality that we have on display here. And so not only the people who are part of the creative elements of that era, but having people who are very much with their careers and their impact and influence on the world today drew so much inspiration from that decade. I want to have that as such a well-rounded element to this film.
Now, one of the other things I am very curious about the people you're getting to collaborate with you. Who will you be getting from the online world? I know last time you had Cecil from Good Bad Flicks, and you had James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd.
Yep.
Do you have anybody else very similar lined up?
Yeah. There several people were lining up. Those two gents were wonderful, and they're coming back. They have a tremendous amount to offer, and we have a couple people lined up as well. And it's still in the works, but I think it's very important to have the fans who became influencers themselves to share their love for this material as well, and that's definitely going to be part of the pantheon of interview subjects talking about this decade.
So I guess as we begin to kind of wind things down, what is the timeline for the Kickstarter and over the course of the next year for this project?
It's pretty much a year in the making. We've been working on this, developing it for the last year as well. But now we are kickstarting April 21st through May 17th. If you back the film now, you get your name in the credits, which is super cool. You get to be alongside the likes of Paul Verhoeven and Sam J. Jones and Sean Young and Dee Wallace and Henry Thomas of E.T. and so on. We're also building this wonderful community online by way of Discord. We're doing watch parties. We're doing Q&As. People who are backers automatically get to talk with like-minded fans and geeks of the genre as well in a very supportive and friendly and fun environment. And now more than ever, I think we need that distraction. So that's part of the package, along with other levels of sort of fun stuff you can get, posters and Blu-rays and DVDs and T-shirts and stuff like that. We have several interviews in the can. We have many more to do, and the idea is to release this in July of 2021.
Well, I got to say, I'm going to be looking forward to July 2021. That will definitely make up for the lost Comic-Con that we lost just recently.
Yeah.
Man, you should do a screening at Comic-Con. Hint, hint, hint.
Hey, I'd love to do that. And hey, just because Comic-Con is over doesn't mean you can't have your own Comic-Con in your own home. You could create little kiosks and lay out your favorite comics and collectibles there, and then dress in cosplay and take pictures. And we'll have our own Comic-Con at home. It can be done.
There actually are people doing that. Surprisingly enough, I have seen that.
If people could go to Disneyland in their own home and Disney World in their own home by recreating their favorite rides, there's no reason we can't do Comic-Con too.
This is true. So, guys, if you want to find out more information, be sure to check out In Search of Darkness or In Search of Tomorrow on Kickstarter. It runs through till May 17th, you said?
Yeah, it goes through May 17th. Just go to 80sci-fi.com, 80sci-fi.com, and that'll redirect you to the Kickstarter. And, for those who are interested in seeing In Search of Darkness, the best way to go is if you go to the In Search of Darkness socials, where you go to 80s Horror Doc on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and there's a link there, and you could get the streaming version of the film.
Fantastic stuff. So, as always, David, thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure chatting with you.
All right, guys, that was my interview with David Weiner, the director of In Search of Tomorrow. Like I said, you can find more information at the links provided. Like I said, please check this out. Please consider contributing to this Kickstarter. Like I said, please go back and check out In Search of Darkness, The Last Action Heroes. Those are two fantastic documentaries. One, if you like action movies, if you want to talk about Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger. But if you want to check out more up my alley, you want to know about Pinhead, Jason, Freddy, etc., then you can check out In Search of Darkness, and you will find all sorts of genre stuff you never knew. And I also found out just how awesome Chop Top is from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So anyway, guys, if you want to keep in touch with us, you can find us at This Week in Geek on Twitter. Alex is primarily maintaining the account, though I do get all messages that do go through it. And you can also find me at Mike at ThisWeekInGeek.net if you want to send me personal feedback. So anyway, guys, until next time, I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd saying, live free or die hard. And as my friend Jackie Bam Bam might say, be cool, be kind, be careful. We'll talk to you guys next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at thisweekingeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at thisweekingeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.